we are playing mentally with the idea of a world in which spiritual guidance is valued. Spiritual guidance is valued. Imagine what the world would look like if we got timeouts at work to meditate. That'd be nice. The topic today is communion with God. And I found myself being a little resistant to writing the talk because I just kept putting it off because I kept thinking, well, how am I supposed to talk about that? It's something we do. Nonetheless, it didn't stop me from coming up with just a few things to say. First of all, I know that for some people, that title, that word God, might touch in on some old memory of some religious beliefs you don't particularly like. And so I really want to invite you today to use your own name for the Divine One. In fact, one of the most ancient and most long-lasting names for the Divine One comes from Sanskrit, and that is the word mother. In Sanskrit, it's Ma. And I have a very good friend who uses that word all the time for the Divine One, Ma. The other thing that is kind of interesting for us to note here on Mother's Day is that the word for holy in Sanskrit is sono. So we are actually living in the county of the Holy Mother. Yeah, boy. I don't know exactly what you're responding to, except that I do know when I think of God as mother, it brings up for me, that idea of a mother with a baby, the baby's getting all the attention and all the love and every need supplied. What a beautiful image. So this dilemma, as we continue on our spiritual path of, okay, I don't like the white word God, so what else can I use? Ernest Holmes, who authored the philosophy we study here, this was right up for him because he grew up in a Christian culture. He was in a Christian culture. He got these ideas as he looked at various religions. So when he spoke about God, he wanted it to be clear to people that he was going beyond what they may have previously been thinking. So he came up with all kinds of names for God. One of the most amusing, I think, for us is, in order to be very neutral about the whole thing, he referred to the Divine One as the thing itself. Now, if the title, Communion with the Thing Itself, doesn't quite do it for you, let's look at some other options. These are some of my favorite. And I invite us actually to say together communion with, and then say the word, and then pause for a moment to see what that word may have touched in you. You can say this out loud, you can say it in the silence of your mind. Here we go. Communion with Spirit. Communion with the Divine One. Communion with the eternal friend. Communion with the source of all. Communion with the beloved. Communion with absolute bliss. Communion with life itself. Communion with the ground of all being. Communion with love. Communion with ultimate reality. So thank you for doing that with me. I know these different words bring up different things in me about the many aspects of God. For example, some of these are more intellectual, like the ground of all being or ultimate reality. And what I like about those is that they appeal to my sense of order and rightness. And they give me a sense of assurance and a reminder that fundamentally all is in order and all is well. Then, of course, some of them are more feeling, emotional, like absolute bliss or love. These evoke in me a feeling of happiness and a trust that everything is working out for the highest good of everyone. Then there's a couple up there that are more relational. Eternal friend, the beloved. These remind me that this huge power that created the universe is on my team. It likes me. It loves me. It loves you. It's on your side. It is always working for your highest good, just like a good friend or a lover. In fact, I use these kind of words in a spiritual practice that I'm now doing. You might remember a few months ago when we were looking at world religions, we spent some time considering what we can learn from Islam. And we learned about the Muslim practice of saying the 99 names for God. Well, that inspired me to come up with my own list. And I decided as a beginner I wasn't going to do 99. Who can remember 99 names? But I came up with 33, which I say 3 times. And I use them when I want to remind myself of my connection to the Divine One, especially if I have been upset and I'm unable to clear the mental clutter. I just start to say the names. And at first, it's almost like a memory game, an intellectual exercise. And then it begins to touch, as I say these different words for the Divine One, it begins to touch on affirmative feelings for me, and my body state starts to shift a bit, and eventually saying the different names of God allows me to remember and know and touch into the presence of the Divine One. This might be a good point to reference the fact that in our book of the month, Runaway Realization, Living a Life of Ceaseless Discovery, the author does make the point that, there's not a goal on a spiritual journey per se. I mean, sometimes I think, okay, just pretty soon if I keep at it, I will awake. I will be enlightened. And then it must keep going. It's endless discovery. It's endless finding out more and more about God's love, about God's qualities, about God in myself. So in our talk title today, Communion with God, we also have that word communion. And I think we all have a pretty good sense of what that means. It's got a lot of definitions, but I was really focusing on 2 of the definitions. Sharing with another is communion, especially if we're talking about thoughts and feelings. And an intimate spiritual relationship, communion. And when I read that one, I thought about the different ways that different cultures, different religions have come up with to symbolize or to invite the experience of union with the Divine One. The first thing I thought of was walking up to the rail in my Lutheran church and kneeling down and receiving the bread and the wine, just a bit. And recognizing that is some wonderful celebration of the fact that we are literally taking into ourselves the essence of God. And then I thought about those wonderful twirling Sufis who twirl and twirl and twirl and twirl until they touch in on ecstasy, a very different way of communing with the Divine One. And then, of course, there is yoga. I went to William Abel's yoga class on Wednesday, and he was talking at the beginning about how the word yoga itself means union. And he also pointed out that everything in the practice of yoga is designed to allow us greater contact with our divine self. Everything is designed toward that. So in these three very different traditions, I think the important thing, when we think of the differences between taking communion and whirling and doing those postures and meditating, I think the important thing to ask ourselves is, what allows me to be in communion with God? Now, to finesse it just a little bit, the truth is that we're always in communion with God, because God is always in communion with us. Always. Whether we're aware of it or not, God is in communion with us. From the point of view of our teaching, the relationship between us and the Divine One can best be described as the relationship between a drop and the ocean. A drop in the ocean, of the ocean, as the ocean, surrounded by the ocean, and the vast ocean itself. The Divine One is indeed around us, in us. We are made of it. Just like that drop, there's no separation between us and the divine, all there is. Now, if that drop got caught up in the turbulence of a wave, it might temporarily lose its sense of connection to the vast ocean. But the ocean is never cut off from the drop. So perhaps we should adjust our question. Instead of what allows me to be in communion with God, perhaps the better question, more accurate, is what allows me to be aware that I am in communion with God? What allows me to be in communion with the God within me and the God around me? So let's begin with the idea of within. Ernest Holmes says this: we, being centers of God consciousness, are never away from God. Universal intelligence, which is at the center of every living creature, may be called into immediate use. The more we turn within ourselves, the more we will develop our powers of inner knowing. The keener will our perceptions be of the still small voice through which guidance comes. So you know what? This turning within is no small thing in our day and age. You've noticed that there's a lot of options out there 24/7 to turning within. You know, should I go sit on my cushion or binge watch the Game of Thrones? You know, it's kind of, I don't know. I don't even want to flip a coin, I don't think. So let me return for a moment to this idea of what happened in yoga class. William was explaining that for most of us in America, when we think about yoga, we picture those intriguing postures and people in attractive yoga outfits holding those postures. And William told us that those postures, which are known as asanas, the whole point of doing them is not to be able to do the posture, but rather the point is to get into the kind of physical shape that can allow a person to comfortably sit in meditation for however long you want. As people practice asanas, they develop a body that is flexible and balanced enough to be able to sit in meditation without aches and pains. And what's the point of sitting without aches and pains? The mind is not distracted. Developing a calm, relaxed body sets the groundwork for a peaceful mind in meditation. And what's the point, according to the yogic tradition, of having a peaceful mind in meditation? A peaceful mind increases our chances of experiencing our oneness, our yoga, our union with the Divine One. A relaxed body leads to a relaxed mind that's open to communion with Spirit. Okay, what happens in those moments, like one I had once, when you can't seem to calm the mind? I have a vague memory of being so upset once. That I couldn't get in touch with the presence of God. I couldn't calm down enough. Well, I think the clue comes in this second sentence here. Universal intelligence, which is at the center of every living creature, may be called into immediate use. Universal intelligence, no matter what's going on, may be called into immediate use. So I couldn't calm down. I couldn't get past my upset. I had the image of like someone wanting to plug into a socket, like I wanted to plug into my source, but like I was just jittering around with the cord, with the plug, and I just couldn't plug in. So I couldn't call it in, so what I did was I accessed that universal intelligence by asking somebody else to pray for me. And in fact, when that prayer was done, I did calm down enough to remember that even though I wasn't aware of it, Spirit was present. I calmed down enough to remember that Spirit is always wanting to be in communion and waiting for me to open to it. So I did something that I learned from 12th century St. Francis of Assisi. I asked Spirit to allow me to be aware of it. Here are St. Francis's words. Dear God, please reveal to us your sublime beauty that is everywhere, 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 so that we will never again feel frightened. My divine love, my love, please let us touch your face. My prayer was a little simpler. It was simply, Spirit, let me feel your presence. And every time I got swept up in the upset, I just stopped and said, Spirit, let me feel your presence. Eventually, I did feel the presence of Spirit again. And what's more, later, as I look back on my journey through the upset, I realized that Spirit was clearly there all along, giving me all kinds of gifts. Because I was so upset, I saw my doctor about de-stressing, and I got some very important information from the intelligence of the universe about de-stressing. The other thing is that my friends noticed I was upset and so held me and expressed love for me. Another wonderful gift from Spirit. Spirit being in communion with me, disguised as people. So now that brings us to the idea of having communion with Spirit by looking out, looking into the world. You can make contact with Spirit within or around you. Hafiz tells us this, 12th century, Persia. Where is the door to God? In the sound of a barking dog, in the ring of a hammer, in a drop of rain, in the face of everyone I see. Our practitioner today, you might have recognized Claire Victor as our choir director and the woman who does those amazing healings with sound bowls. Claire once told me a wonderful story about her visit to Assisi in Italy. She went for a spiritual retreat. And there were, no surprise, being St. Francis's town, there were dogs roaming all over the place. And as I recall the story, you can get the real scoop from Claire later. The first night, the barking and barking and barking was just incredibly annoying to her. Next day, feeling tired, she went to her retreat. Second night, she heard it, but it didn't bother her. Isn't that a nice shift when that, have you been there, that kind of thing that's such a victory, something that's been bothering you doesn't bother you anymore? It's like, hallelujah. The third night, it sounded to her like it was a choir of dogs who were singing to each other in their own musical language. Where is the door to God? In the sound of a barking dog, in the ring of a hammer, in a drop of rain, in the face of everyone I see. It's a reminder to look around ourselves to see how and where the Divine One is showing up as life, as beauty, as joy, as good, either in nature or in other people, and to know that whenever you are aware of those qualities, you are aware of Spirit. Whenever you feel touched by those qualities, you are in communion with the Divine One. If you're in nature appreciating the abundance of life around you, you're appreciating God. If you find yourself feeling joy as you sing or dance or laugh, you're feeling the presence of God. Anytime you notice anything of beauty in the world, that beauty that is everywhere, 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 you're noticing God. And the more that you pay attention to your beloved, the more you'll understand that the beloved is also paying full attention to you. Here's a final word of encouragement from Hafiz. At some point, your relationship with God will become like this. Next time you meet him in a forest or on a crowded street, there won't be any more leaving. That is, God will climb into your pocket. You will simply take yourself along.